At 29, Madison Clark had built the kind of life she once thought belonged only to people in magazines. By day, she worked as a financial analyst in downtown San Francisco, surrounded by glass towers and the constant hum of ambition. By night, she returned to a quiet street in the Sunset District, where rows of pastel Victorian houses leaned into the ocean breeze. Her own house sat at the end of the block, a two-story Victorian painted soft gray with white trim. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. Every inch of it had been earned through years of restraint, saying no to weekend getaways, skipping dinners out, working late nights at the firm, even taking side projects just to push her savings higher. She had been 24 when she opened a separate account labeled House Fund. Now, 5 years later, she carried the keys in her purse and the mortgage in her name. It was more than a roof. It was proof that she could stand on her own feet, independent of anyone else's promises. Sometimes, as she turned the key after a long day, she would pause on the porch and whisper to herself, "This is mine. No one gave it to me. No one can take it away." That quiet affirmation made all the sacrifices feel worth it. It was during this fragile moment of pride, when she finally believed her independence was secure, that Ethan Brooks walked into her life. He appeared at the firm one Monday morning, introduced as the new head of sales. Tall, sharp-shouldered, with brown eyes that seemed to weigh and measure everything. He carried himself with the calm confidence of a man used to being noticed. His smile had just enough warmth to feel personal, as though he saved it for her alone. Madison told herself to stay focused. She had just closed on her house. She had sworn she would pour the next few years into career growth, not relationships. But Ethan had a way of slipping past her defenses. In meetings, he lingered by her chair, asking questions that revealed he'd paid close attention to her reports. After one successful client pitch, he leaned close and said, "You've got instincts that can't be taught, Madison. Want to talk strategy over dinner?" Normally, she avoided situations that blurred personal and professional lines, but that evening she found herself sitting across from him in a small bistro near Market Street. They talked about everything but work, his travels, her favorite neighborhoods, the little quirks of city life. She was surprised at how easily laughter came, how quickly the hours disappeared. By the time he hailed a cab and insisted on walking her to her door, the spell was already forming. When he asked where she lived, Madison hesitated. She felt a sudden, sharp instinct not to reveal the truth. Something about the way his gaze flicked across her clothes, her handbag, the cab's meter, calculated, observant, made her protect her most precious secret. So she smiled and lied lightly. "I rent an apartment near the Civic Center. Nothing special." Ethan nodded, explaining that he was staying with his mother while looking for a place of his own. He shrugged, making it sound temporary, almost embarrassing. She found herself softening. They both seemed, in that moment, like two professionals carving out their futures piece by piece. But later, standing inside her Victorian with the door locked behind her, Madison leaned against the wall and let out a slow breath. She wasn't sure why she had lied. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear that revealing she already owned a home would tilt the balance, change the way he saw her. The house wasn't just a building. It was her shield, her fortress. And something deep in her gut told her to keep that shield hidden. As weeks passed, the relationship quickened. Ethan was attentive, generous with compliments, adept at knowing what she wanted before she voiced it. Flowers arrived at her office. He remembered the exact Pinot Noir she had once praised in passing. It felt almost magical, as if someone had handed him a list of her desires. Madison found herself swept into the kind of whirlwind romance she had only witnessed in other people's lives. Still, the secret of the house remained. Whenever Ethan dropped her off after a late dinner, she redirected him toward a different neighborhood, pretending her apartment was on another street. And when he finally stayed the night for the first time, she spun the same story she had used before. "This is my grandmother's house. She's with relatives in another state, so I'm just looking after it for now." Ethan's eyes had swept over the carved banisters, the high ceilings, the stained glass window in the stairwell. He whistled softly. Your grandmother's lucky. Victorian homes like this cost a fortune these days. Madison forced a smile, repeating the lie as casually as she could. She's always been generous. Letting me stay here is a blessing. She couldn't explain why the words came so easily, why the instinct to protect her ownership felt stronger with each passing day. All she knew was that the house, her house, was the one part of her life she refused to place in anyone else's hands. And even as Ethan's presence grew larger, as dinners turned into weekends and weekends blurred into talk of the future, Madison carried the secret like a hidden weapon. One day she might need it. For now, she let herself fall, believing that maybe love had found her at last, without realizing just how dangerous that lie about her grandmother would become. The weeks that followed were filled with small gestures and careful attention. Ethan seemed determined to prove himself the perfect partner. He called Madison in the middle of stressful workdays just to ask if she'd eaten lunch. He stocked her refrigerator with the oat milk he knew she preferred, learned the exact way she liked her coffee, and left handwritten notes tucked into her planner. It was disarming. Madison, who had built her life on self-sufficiency, found herself softening. She began to believe that maybe, for once, she could lean on someone else. Then Ethan told her he wanted her to meet his mother. "Victoria will love you," he said one Friday evening over dinner. His tone was bright, but his eyes carried a flicker of expectation. "She's protective, but once she knows you, she'll see what I see." Madison agreed, though a knot formed in her stomach. They met the following Sunday at a restaurant in the Marina District, a place with white tablecloths and framed photos of San Francisco's waterfront on the walls. Victoria Brooks was already seated when they arrived. She was in her early 60s, tall, with an upright posture that carried the authority of someone used to commanding rooms. Her silver hair was styled into a neat bob, and her pearl earrings gleamed under the light. She rose as they approached, her eyes sweeping Madison from head to toe in a single, assessing glance. "So this is Madison," she said, her smile precise, almost rehearsed. "At last." Her voice carried the measured cadence of a school principal, warm on the surface but edged with discipline. Through appetizers and polite conversation, Victoria maintained that same air. Friendly enough, but watchful, as if she were measuring Madison against a checklist only she knew. She asked about Madison's work in finance, her family, her goals for the future. Then came the questions that landed like stones dropped into calm water. "And your grandmother," Victoria said, folding her hands neatly. Ethan mentioned she has a house. "Where is it exactly?" Madison's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She swallowed, carefully keeping her expression neutral. "In Oregon," she said smoothly, echoing the story she had created. "She lives with relatives now, but she let me stay there for a while." Victoria's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, like a teacher catching a student in a half-truth. How generous of her. Is she still in good health? Madison smiled politely. She has her ups and downs, but she's sharp, very careful with her affairs. Victoria sipped her water, gaze never leaving Madison's face. "And she only has the one property?" "Yes," Madison answered, her voice calm though her pulse thudded in her ears. "Just the house." Ethan reached across the table, brushing Madison's hand lightly. "Mom," he said with practiced ease, "you're interrogating her." Victoria's lips curved in what might have been a laugh, though it held little mirth. "I'm simply interested. My son doesn't bring women home often. I want to know the person who may become part of our family." Her words dripped with a kind of courtesy that felt more like a warning. The rest of the meal passed in strained civility. Madison smiled and answered questions, but beneath the surface her unease grew. She had been through countless business negotiations in boardrooms, yet she had never felt so scrutinized. Victoria's eyes were sharp, not curious but calculating, as though she were searching for an angle, a weakness. Afterward, when they stepped outside into the cool air, Madison exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ethan slipped an arm around her shoulders. "She's tough," he admitted, a sheepish grin tugging at his lips. "Always has been. But don't take it personally." Madison raised an eyebrow. She was thorough. "She just worries about me," he explained quickly. "Ever since my dad left. She's been overly protective. That's all." The way he said it was meant to reassure, but it only deepened the pit in Madison's stomach. Something about Victoria's line of questioning hadn't been protective. It had been invasive, almost hungry. As Ethan hailed a cab, Madison glanced back through the restaurant window. Victoria was still at the table, watching them leave with a faint smile that never reached her eyes. For the first time since meeting Ethan, Madison felt the flicker of a warning she couldn't quite name. But when Ethan leaned close and kissed her temple, whispering, "Don't worry, she'll come around," Madison forced a smile. She told herself that maybe he was right. Maybe it was just a mother's concern. Still, as the cab pulled away and the city lights blurred past, Madison couldn't shake the memory of Victoria's gaze, sharp, probing, as if peeling back layers Madison had fought hard to protect. The wedding was small by San Francisco standards, almost modest. Madison had imagined something simple from the beginning, but she quickly realized her vision was not the one being carried out. Victoria Brooks inserted herself into nearly every decision, choosing the flowers, debating the seating arrangements, even insisting on which bakery to use for the cake. When Madison suggested a vineyard in Napa for the reception, Victoria dismissed it as too far, too impractical, and steered them toward a downtown hotel she claimed had better pedigree. Ethan, caught between them, would smile apologetically and say, "Mom's just trying to help. She's organized 100 events." Each time, Madison bit back her frustration. It was easier to nod and let the current pull her along than to start a war before the marriage had even begun. On the day itself, Madison looked radiant in her dress. Yet, she couldn't shake the sensation that she was stepping into a script someone else had written. As she stood across from Ethan, reciting vows beneath chandeliers and surrounded by the watchful eyes of Victoria's chosen guests, she felt both loved and cornered. After the ceremony, Victoria approached her with a smile polished to perfection. "You've made a wise choice, dear. My son is everything you'll ever need. Trust me, I know." The words were meant as a blessing, but they felt like a binding. When the honeymoon was canceled at the last minute, Ethan claimed a major business opportunity couldn't wait. Madison swallowed her disappointment. Instead of white beaches, she returned to her Victorian house in the Sunset District, now shared with her new husband. At first, it was sweet. Ethan cooked breakfast, left her little notes, massaged her shoulders after long days. They laughed in the kitchen, clinked glasses of wine in the evenings, and Madison thought maybe the unease she had felt was nothing more than pre-wedding nerves. But slowly the sweetness thinned. Ethan began working late, his phone buzzing with calls he always answered in hushed tones on the balcony. When Madison entered the room, he would snap his laptop shut. Envelopes appeared, legal-looking, heavy with official seals, only to be swept quickly into his briefcase. Victoria's presence grew too constant. She dropped by several times a week, sometimes bringing casseroles, other times stacks of papers she claimed were recipes or magazine clippings. Madison would catch mother and son bent over the dining table, speaking in low voices, silencing themselves when she walked in. It was during one of those evenings, when Madison returned home earlier than usual, that the shadows revealed themselves. She had left a late meeting downtown, taken an earlier train, and let herself quietly into the house. The sound of voices floated from the kitchen. "Don't rush it," Ethan was saying. His tone was tight, careful. "We don't have time to waste," Victoria countered sharply. "Last time you hesitated, and look what happened. We can't afford another failure." Madison froze in the hallway, her breath catching. Her hands trembled as she pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear. Relax, Ethan muttered. This isn't like before. This time it's a whole house, not just a condo. And Madison isn't stupid. All of them think they're clever until love blinds them, Victoria said with a scoff. She'll sign when the moment is right. Just be ready. The paperwork is prepared. Madison's heart slammed against her ribs. Paperwork. Houses. Failures in the past. The words tangled into something ugly and frightening. She slipped back toward the front door, then pushed it open loudly, letting it slam shut behind her. I'm home, she called, forcing a cheerful tone. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway a moment later, smiling as if nothing had happened. You're early. Thought you had that late review tonight. They canceled, Madison replied evenly. She glanced past him and caught sight of Victoria, hurriedly tucking a stack of papers into her handbag. Victoria's smile was wide, almost too wide. Madison, darling, you look pale. Long day at work. Madison nodded, pretending weariness. Just tired. It's been hectic lately. Well, soon you'll have time to rest, Victoria said smoothly. Once things settle. The conversation drifted into pleasantries, but Madison's mind was a storm. She excused herself early, retreating to the upstairs bedroom. Behind the closed door, she pressed her palms against the dresser, her breath shaky. There was no longer any doubt. The instinct that had told her to hide her ownership of the house had been right. Ethan and his mother were circling her life like hawks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And yet, she said nothing. Not to Ethan, not to Victoria, not even to her closest friends at work. Instead, she chose silence, wearing it like armor. Because Madison understood something vital. You don't confront a predator before you know the full extent of its claws. So she smiled at breakfasts, pretended not to notice the whispered phone calls, and let Victoria's visits pass without protest. All the while, a seed of dread rooted itself deeper inside her chest, growing stronger with every passing day. She would wait and she would watch. And when the time came, Madison promised herself she would be ready. It happened on a Tuesday evening when the fog rolled in thick over San Francisco, muffling the world outside the windows. Madison was cleaning up the upstairs bedroom while Ethan was supposedly out with clients. She bent to pick up a sweater from the floor near his dresser and noticed that the bottom drawer didn't slide shut properly. A corner of paper protruded, just enough to catch her eye. She tugged the drawer open. At first, she thought it was ordinary clutter. Old receipts, envelopes, a few stray business cards. But beneath them lay a slim leather folder. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out and flipped it open. Inside were documents that had no reason to be in Ethan's possession. Property deeds with unfamiliar names. Quitclaim forms stamped with county seals. Signatures that looked suspiciously alike, as if one hand had written them all. Tucked between the pages were photographs. Older women standing in front of houses, smiling stiffly. Each picture looked staged, like proof shots for a file. On the back of one, a name was scrawled, Mrs. Henderson. Another had Clara James. Madison's eyes blurred as she flipped through them. Every face was different, but every story looked eerily similar. Women with homes, women with assets, women who had probably trusted the wrong man. At the bottom of the folder, she found a copy of a driver's license. Her heart lurched. It was Ethan's picture, but the name printed above it read David Ross. A second license showed the same face, this time under the name Michael Green. Madison's hands shook so violently that the folder slipped from her grasp and spilled across the floor. Paper fluttered around her like falling leaves. She dropped to her knees, gathering them up with frantic care. The evidence was undeniable. Ethan wasn't just secretive, he was running a game. And Victoria was part of it. Her mind raced. The whispers she had overheard. The papers Victoria had tucked hastily into her bag. The too smooth lies about business opportunities. It all snapped into place with horrifying clarity. She stuffed the documents back into the folder, replaced it in the drawer exactly as she had found it, and forced the dresser shut. Her heart pounded in her ears. She needed confirmation. Proof beyond her own discovery. Someone she could trust. That night, long after Ethan had returned home and fallen asleep, Madison sat in the dim light of her office with her phone in hand. Her thumb hovered over a contact she hadn't called in years. Angela Kim. They had met in college, two ambitious young women chasing big futures. While Madison went into finance, Angela had chosen law enforcement, climbing her way into the San Francisco Police Department's investigative division. Madison hesitated, then pressed call. Angela answered on the second ring. Madison? Wow, it's been forever. Her voice was warm, but surprised. I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't serious, Madison whispered, glancing toward the bedroom where Ethan slept. I need to ask about someone. Quietly. There was a pause, then Angela's tone sharpened. Tell me everything. The next day, they met at a small coffee shop near the Embarcadero, one Angela said she trusted. Madison slid into the booth, her nerves raw. She handed Angela a slip of paper with the names she had found. David Ross, Michael Green, and Ethan's real name. Angela's brow furrowed as she read. You know these are aliases, right? Madison nodded. I need to know if there's a record. Angela promised to check what she could. But Madison, she warned, leaning closer, if what you're telling me is true, you could be in danger. People who build lives on lies don't stop until they're forced to. That night Madison barely slept. The house felt different now. Less like her sanctuary, more like a stage set where every wall hid trapdoor. 2 days later, Angela called her back. Madison answered on the first ring. You were right, Angela said, her voice grim. Ethan Brooks, real name confirmed, but he's used at least 3 other identities in the last decade. And Victoria Brooks? She's been flagged before too. Multiple reports, all tied to real estate fraud and elder exploitation cases. They've been accused of scamming women out of property, sometimes by marriage, sometimes by forged deeds. Madison's throat went dry. So why aren't they in prison? Not enough evidence, Angela replied. These people cover their tracks well. Victims often don't realize what's happening until it's too late. And by then, paperwork makes it look legal. Madison pressed her hand to her forehead, fighting the dizziness that swept over her. Images of Ethan's smile, his tender gestures, his whispered promises collided with the reality of the folder she had held in her hands. All of it, every flower, every note, every kiss, was part of a pattern. Angela's voice softened. Listen, Madison. You need to be careful. Don't confront him yet. Document everything. If you find more, bring it to me. We'll build a case the right way. When the call ended, Madison sat in silence. Rage and grief tangled inside her like barbed wire. She felt foolish for believing in Ethan, ashamed for ignoring the signs, furious at being reduced to just another file in his collection. But beneath the pain, something else stirred, a spark of resolve. She had built her life from nothing once before. She could protect it again. And this time, she wouldn't just defend what was hers. She would make Ethan and Victoria answer for every life they had wrecked before hers. Ethan called it a work gathering, insisting it was nothing formal, just a few colleagues getting together to celebrate the end of a successful quarter. He urged Madison to join him, saying it would be good for her to meet the people who supported his career. Madison dressed carefully that evening, reminding herself to play the role of supportive wife. They drove across the city to a rental space above a restaurant in Soma, the kind of place usually booked for corporate mixers. When they arrived, the room was already filled with people, glasses clinking, laughter buzzing. Ethan introduced them as his co-workers, guiding her from group to group with a practiced hand at her back. But something felt wrong. The names didn't match the stories Ethan had told her. He had once described a marketing manager obsessed with baseball, but the man she met introduced himself as an event planner. Another colleague claimed to be in sales, but knew nothing about the company's product line. Their smiles were polite, their eyes distant. They didn't ask about Madison, didn't mention work projects, didn't even seem to know Ethan well. As the evening wore on, the pit in her stomach grew heavier. These weren't co-workers. They were strangers, props in a performance. At one point, she slipped away to the restroom, gripping the counter as she stared at her reflection. Her pulse raced. Why go to such lengths? Who are these people? When she returned, Ethan was in the corner, speaking in hushed tones to a woman she didn't recognize. The woman handed him an envelope, which he tucked quickly into his jacket before noticing Madison. He crossed the room with an easy smile, kissing her cheek as if nothing had happened. Having fun? Madison forced a smile. Your co-workers are interesting. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, they're a quirky bunch. But when she pressed for details, names of departments, specific projects, he dodged, turning questions into jokes or steering the conversation elsewhere. The lies were piling up, so Madison felt she might drown in them. That night, back at the house, she tried again. Ethan, who were those people really? Because they didn't seem like co-workers. He bristled, his jaw tightening. Why are you interrogating me? Not everyone wants to talk about business outside of the office. You're overthinking. She stared at him, feeling the distance between them widen like a canyon. I just want the truth. The truth is I love you, he snapped, then softened instantly, wrapping his arms around her. Don't ruin a good thing by doubting me. But doubt had already rooted itself deep. The following day, Madison met Angela again, this time in a quiet corner of a library where Angela often worked on case notes. Madison relayed the details of the work gathering, the strangers, the envelope. Angela listened carefully, then slid a folder across the table. I ran deeper checks, she said. You need to see this. Inside were records of multiple identities, driver's licenses, social security numbers tied to Ethan's photo but under different names. Bank accounts opened and closed. Marriage licenses filed in other states. Each one ended with the same pattern. The marriage dissolved within a year, property transferred, the spouse left behind with debt or nothing at all. Madison's breath caught. How many? Angela's eyes were grim. At least 4 documented cases. Maybe more. Every time, he vanished when he couldn't secure the assets he wanted. His mother's name shows up, too. She's listed as a witness, a guarantor, even a joint tenant on a few properties. It's a pattern, Madison, and it's organized. The folder blurred as tears welled in Madison's eyes. She thought of the women in the photographs she had found, their stiff smiles, their unaware faces. They hadn't just been unlucky. They had been hunted. Angela reached across the table, steadying her hand. You need to understand, this isn't about love. To him, you're not a wife. You're an investment, and your house is the prize. Madison closed her eyes, while rising in her throat. Every memory of Ethan, the flowers, the notes, the tender words whispered in the dark, rearranged themselves into something sinister. He hadn't fallen for her. He had targeted her, calculated her. She wiped her face, her voice low but steady. So I'm next on the list. Angela didn't answer. She didn't have to. That night, Madison sat alone in her Victorian home, staring at the stained glass window in the stairwell. The house had once been her triumph, her symbol of independence. Now it felt like a bullseye painted on her back. But as grief coursed through her, anger burned hotter. She would not be another file in Ethan's folder, another photograph tucked into his drawer. If he thought she was a victim, he was wrong. For the first time, Madison let the thought crystallize into certainty. Ethan and Victoria had chosen the wrong woman. Madison had never thought of herself as someone capable of plotting. She was a woman of numbers, of spreadsheets and forecasts, someone who believed in order and discipline. But as she sat across from Detective Angela Kim in a quiet diner late one night, the steam from their coffee rising between them, she realized that survival sometimes demanded strategy. We can't wait for them to make their move, Angela said firmly. If we do, the paperwork will be in their favor, and it'll be nearly impossible to unwind. We need to get them in the act. Madison nodded, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. They're obsessed with the house. If I make them believe my grandmother wants to transfer it to me officially, they'll push. That's when they'll try to slide in their own notary. Angela leaned back, a spark of approval in her eyes. And if we have the right people there, the real paperwork, the real notary, they'll expose themselves. It sounded simple, but the logistics were anything but. Over the next week, Madison and Angela sketched out every detail. They found an actress, a retired theater performer in her 70s named Eleanor, who had the perfect combination of warmth and authority. With a pair of wire-rimmed glasses and a cane, she could easily pass as Madison's grandmother. Eleanor listened carefully to the plan, then smiled. "Honey, I've been playing roles my whole life. If you need a sharp-tongued grandmother who knows her way around a deed, I can give you Broadway." Madison almost laughed for the first time in weeks. Next came the paperwork. Angela arranged for a legitimate notary public she trusted to participate in the sting. The notary would prepare real documents showing a grant deed from the grandmother to Madison. Perfectly legal, perfectly binding. Alongside that, they would stage the environment, a rented Victorian home on the edge of Pacific Heights, filled with the kind of old-fashioned furniture one might expect in a grandmother's house. "Details matter," Angela explained. "If they suspect even for a second this isn't real, they'll walk. We need them greedy enough to blind themselves." Madison spread the word carefully. At dinner with Ethan one night, she dropped the line casually, as though it had slipped out by accident. "Grandma's health is worse," she said quietly, pushing her food around her plate. "She called me today. She wants to make sure the house is really mine legally. She doesn't trust banks anymore. She wants to meet a notary next week." Ethan froze, just for a fraction of a second, then smiled sympathetically. "That's good, Madison. It's important to have things secure. Do you need help finding someone reliable?" The hook was set. Within 24 hours, Victoria showed up unannounced, her eyes sharp as she perched on the edge of Madison's sofa. "Ethan told me about your grandmother's decision. Wise woman. But don't trust just any notary. We know someone who has handled family property for years. Discreet. Dependable." Madison kept her expression careful, hiding the adrenaline that surged inside her. "That might be helpful," she murmured. "Grandma can be particular." Victoria's smile was thin and victorious, as though the game was already won. After they left, Madison called Angela immediately. They took the bait. Angela's voice hardened. "Good. Now we finish this." The days leading up to the meeting were some of the longest of Madison's life. She lived in the same house with Ethan, smiled at him over morning coffee, kissed him goodnight, all while knowing that in a matter of days his entire facade would collapse. Every touch of his hand felt like a mask she was about to rip away. She rehearsed the scene with Eleanor, making sure the older woman knew every line, every reaction. Eleanor practiced signing shaky handwriting, practiced feigning confusion before declaring with authority, "This house goes to Madison." The notary reviewed the documents 3 times, ensuring every signature line and seal was authentic. Angela coordinated quietly with her team, assigning undercover officers to pose as distant relatives and neighbors who would drop by the meeting. Every detail was layered, designed to keep Ethan and Victoria from suspecting a thing until it was too late. On the night before the setup, Madison stood in her real Victorian home, staring at the stained glass window she had once loved so much. She thought about the years she had worked for this, the nights she had cried from exhaustion but pushed forward anyway. Ethan had thought he found an easy mark, a woman blinded by affection. But what he had really found was a woman who had built herself out of sacrifice and grit, and who refused to lose everything to his lies. When she finally went to bed, Ethan was already asleep, his breathing steady. Madison lay awake beside him, listening, her chest tight with anticipation. Tomorrow would be the day. The stage was set. The actors were ready. The trap was waiting. And Madison, for the first time, felt the power shift in her favor. The rented Victorian in Pacific Heights looked exactly as they had planned. Lace curtains drawn against the fading light, the scent of lavender candles in the air, a tea set waiting on the table. Eleanor, in her role as Madison's grandmother, sat in an armchair by the bay window, her glasses perched on her nose, her cane propped within reach. She looked every bit the matriarch, fragile in frame but sharp in presence. Madison arrived with Ethan and Victoria, right on schedule. Ethan held her hand tightly, the way a man might reassure his wife before an important family decision. Victoria, dressed in a navy blazer and pearls, moved quickly into the room, scanning the details with the hawk-like eyes of someone who had orchestrated dozens of these schemes. "My, what a lovely home," she said to Eleanor, her smile gracious but calculating. Eleanor gave a polite nod. "Yes, dear. I've lived in homes like this all my life. But time catches up with us, doesn't it?" She sighed theatrically, then looked toward Madison. "I want to make sure my granddaughter is secure." Madison squeezed her hands together, forcing herself to play the part of a dutiful heir. "That's why we're here, Grandma, to finalize everything." A man in a dark suit entered then, carrying a briefcase, the real notary, licensed by the state of California. He sat up at the dining table, laying out the official grant deed papers, seals, and stamp. Madison caught the flicker of irritation in Victoria's eyes. Before Victoria could intervene, she pulled a phone from her purse and stepped aside. Moments later, another man arrived, tall, thin, with slicked-back hair. He carried his own leather folder. "This is Mr. Collins," Victoria announced smoothly. "Our family's trusted notary." The room shifted. 2 notaries, 2 sets of papers. Ethan's jaw tightened as he tried to keep the scene under control. "Mom, maybe that's unnecessary. They already have someone here." "Nonsense," Victoria interrupted, her voice firm. "We should use someone we trust." The fake notary began unpacking his documents. Madison felt her heart hammering, but kept her face serene. She glanced toward Eleanor, who gave the slightest nod, her performance unwavering. The real notary spoke first, his tone calm but authoritative. "Ma'am, I've been retained for this transfer. I have the verified documents ready for signature." Victoria's smile sharpened. "And yet, we prefer someone who has worked with us before." She slid her folder across the table. Inside, the deed was altered, Madison's name alongside Ethan's, creating joint ownership. Eleanor leaned forward, peering at the papers with feigned confusion. "Why does this say both of them? I thought this was for Madison alone." "That's standard," Victoria replied quickly. "She's married now. Everything should be shared." Madison's throat tightened, anger boiling just beneath her calm expression. She had prepared for this exact moment. "Actually," she said softly, "Grandma wanted the house in my name only. That was her wish." Ethan placed a hand on her arm, his voice smooth as honey. "Madison, it's fine. It's just a formality. We're building a life together. Sharing makes sense." Madison looked at him then, really looked, at the charming smile, the polished tone, the layers of lies she now understood. And she smiled back, though hers carried a weight he didn't yet recognize. "I think," Madison said slowly, "it's time we all stop pretending." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. Setting it on the table, she pressed play on her laptop. The kitchen conversation she had recorded filled the room. Ethan's voice whispering about last time's failure. Victoria's voice insisting the paperwork is prepared. The color drained from Ethan's face. Victoria froze, her hand still on the forged deed. Before either could move, the front door opened and several figures stepped in. Plainclothes officers, blending into the scene until the flash of badges made everything real. Detective Angela Kim was at the front, her eyes locked on Ethan and Victoria. "San Francisco Police Department," she announced. "Step away from the table." The fake notary backed toward the wall, his bravado gone in an instant. Ethan started to rise, but one of the officers placed a hand firmly on his shoulder. Victoria's voice rose, shrill and indignant. "This is a family matter." "You have no right," Angela cut her off. "We have every right." "Fraud. Attempted theft. Conspiracy. You're done." Madison stood still, her hand steady as she slid the stack of documents from Victoria's folder across the table toward Angela. "There's more," she said, her voice clear. "Multiple deeds, forged signatures, and the photos in their possession, women just like me. It's all here." Angela nodded, gathering the evidence with practiced precision. Ethan's mask cracked completely then. "Madison," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "You don't understand. This is all a mistake." But Madison met his eyes, her own expression carved from stone. "No, Ethan. For once, I understand perfectly." Victoria slumped into her chair, realizing the performance was over. The pearls at her neck gleamed coldly under the light, a costume stripped of power. As the officers cuffed them both, reading their Miranda rights, the room seemed to exhale. The staged home, the tea set, the lavender scent, it had all been theater, but the consequences were real. Madison felt her chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. For months, she had lived under the weight of lies. Now, at last, the truth had shattered the stage. Ethan and Victoria had no more masks to wear, no more exits to run to. The trap had closed. The officers moved with calm efficiency as they pulled Ethan and Victoria from their chairs. Handcuffs clicked around their wrists, sharp in the stillness of the rented Victorian. Madison stood rooted to the floor, watching as the people who had filled her life with fear and deceit were read their rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words rolled out, steady and unyielding. Ethan stared at Madison, his face twisted with disbelief, as though she had betrayed him rather than the other way around. "Madison, please, this isn't what it looks like," he shouted as the officers guided him toward the door. Victoria's voice was shriller, filled with outrage. "You don't know what you're doing. We're family. This is a misunderstanding." But the officers didn't flinch. They ushered her out alongside her son, their protest swallowed by the night. For the first time in months, Madison felt the weight lift from her chest. She wasn't free yet, but she was safe. At the San Francisco Police Department, detectives cataloged the evidence: the forged deeds, the USB recordings, the photographs of other women. Angela kept Madison updated at every step, ensuring she never felt alone. "You've done something many couldn't," Angela told her during one late-night call. "You didn't just protect yourself, you gave us what we needed to stop them for good." The case moved swiftly. With the amount of documentation Madison had provided and the corroboration from other victims, women who came forward once they heard Ethan and Victoria were in custody, the district attorney's office had more than enough to proceed. When the trial began, Madison sat in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She listened as the prosecutor laid out the story: a mother and son team who targeted vulnerable women, using charm, false identities, and forged paperwork to siphon away homes and savings. The defense tried to paint Ethan as a misguided man, manipulated by an overbearing mother. They suggested Madison had misunderstood, that the joint ownership paperwork was merely an innocent mistake. But the evidence spoke louder than excuses. The jury saw the pattern: marriages abandoned when property transfers failed, financial trails leading back to both Ethan and Victoria. The voices on Madison's recording unmistakable. One by one, past victims testified. Some trembled as they described the shame of being deceived. Others spoke with anger that had simmered for years. Madison's heart broke for them, but she also felt solidarity. Together, their stories formed a wall of truth that no defense could climb. When Madison took the stand, she spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. She described how Ethan had swept into her life, how Victoria had questioned her, how she had found the folder of aliases hidden in her own home. She told the jury about the fear, the lies, the moment she realized she had become the next target in their long line of victims. And then she described the sting operation. She didn't embellish, she didn't need to. The facts alone were damning. The courtroom was silent as she finished. She caught Ethan's gaze from across the room. His once confident smile was gone, replaced by a hollow stare. Victoria looked smaller than Madison had ever seen her, her spine no longer rigid, her eyes darting with desperation. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and forgery. The judge, his voice grave, sentenced Ethan and Victoria Brooks to years in state prison. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, final and undeniable. In the days that followed, Madison filed for divorce. The process was mercifully quick. With Ethan in custody, there was no opposition. The house, the one thing she had fought so hard to protect, was secured in her name alone, free of any claim. She walked through its rooms differently now. The stained glass window in the stairwell caught the afternoon light, scattering color across the walls. For months, she had seen it as a target, the prize her husband and mother-in-law had tried to steal. Now it shone as a symbol of survival. At night, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the fog drifting in from the Pacific. Fear no longer haunted her every step. In its place was a deep, steady calm. Relief came first. Relief that she had escaped their grip, that the law had stepped in before it was too late. Then came gratitude for Angela, for Eleanor, for every piece of evidence that had tipped the scales toward justice. And finally satisfaction, not the kind that shouted or gloated, but the quiet kind that hummed through her veins, steady and undeniable. Madison had faced predators who thought they could strip her of everything she had built. Instead, she had watched them fall. As she closed the door one evening, the keys cool in her hand, Madison felt the full circle of her journey. From terror to triumph, from being hunted to standing free, she had reclaimed her life. And in the silence of her home, she allowed herself a small, victorious smile. 6 months had passed since the verdict. The rhythm of Madison's life had settled into something steady, something she could finally call her own. The nightmares that once woke her in the middle of the night had quieted. The fear that had lurked in every corner of her Victorian house was gone. One foggy Saturday morning, Madison sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee warming her hands. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass window above the stairwell, casting fragments of color onto the hardwood floor. For months, she had avoided that spot, unable to look at it without remembering whispered conversations and forged papers. But now those colors felt different, like a reminder of resilience, of surviving a storm. The house had become more than shelter. It was a symbol of her independence, the monument to years of sacrifice and grit. But after everything, it meant something deeper. It was proof that she had faced down deception and walked away stronger. Each creak of the floorboards, each draft that drifted through the old windows, reminded her of her fight and her victory. Sometimes, when she let herself reflect, she thought about how easily she could have walked away at the first sign of trouble. She could have sold the house, left Ethan without confrontation, started over somewhere else. But if she had, he and Victoria would have simply moved on to their next victim, another woman blindsided by charm and false promises. The thought of that made her chest tighten. By standing her ground, she hadn't just protected herself, she had stopped them from hurting anyone else. She still remembered the look on Ethan's face in the courtroom when the guilty verdict rang out. Gone was the confidence, the easy smile, the polished mask. What remained was fear, the same fear he had once tried to plant in her. Victoria, too, had looked deflated, her sharp edges dulled under the weight of justice. Those images stayed with Madison, not as triumphs to gloat over, but as reminders that even the most careful predators could fall. Life moved forward in ways both small and profound. Madison returned to her work with a sharper instinct, no longer the woman who took every word at face value. Colleagues noticed her new steadiness, a quiet authority that came not from spreadsheets or forecasts but from lived truth. She had stared manipulation in the eye and refused to be broken. That kind of strength could not be taught. Angela remained close. Sometimes they met for dinner, sometimes just a quick call to check in. "You know," Angela told her one evening as they walked along the Embarcadero, "not everyone would have had the courage to do what you did. Most people would have run. You didn't." Madison had smiled softly. Maybe I didn't have a choice. But she knew she had. She had chosen to fight, to stay, to gather evidence instead of fleeing. And that choice had changed everything. On quiet nights, she would sit on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders, listening to the city hum beneath the fog. She let herself breathe deeply, filling her lungs with the salt-tinged air that reminded her of beginnings. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt light, free. She thought often of the women whose photos she had found in Ethan's folder. Their cautious smiles, their eyes unaware of the trap closing around them. She wished she could tell them, "I fought for you too. In stopping them, I honored you." In the end, Madison knew the real lesson wasn't about fear or betrayal. It was about trust and how easily it could be twisted. Trust but verify. That was the phrase she repeated to herself, the anchor she carried forward. Trust was necessary to live, to love, to connect, but blind trust could destroy. And another truth had crystallized. Never let anyone else write the script of your life. Ethan and Victoria had tried to turn her into a character in their scheme, a pawn in their con. But Madison had seized the pen back, and in doing so, she had written her own ending. As the months slipped into a new year, she didn't pretend the scars were gone. They lingered in subtle ways, the flicker of doubt when someone new smiled too warmly, the instinct to question motives. But those scars weren't weakness. They were strength etched into her story. One evening, as twilight spread over San Francisco, Madison stood at the top of her staircase, looking out through the stained glass window. Colors spilled across her face, amber, emerald, sapphire. She felt the weight of everything she had endured, and the lightness of what she had reclaimed. The house was hers. Her life was hers. Justice had been done. And in that quiet, steady moment, Madison allowed herself a smile, not one of bitterness or gloating, but of calm triumph. She had faced betrayal and come out whole. She had looked into the eyes of those who underestimated her and proven that she was stronger than their schemes. The story was hers now, and no one, not Ethan, not Victoria, not anyone, would ever take that away again. I grabbed my car keys from the kitchen counter, already running late. The small battery icon on the fob flashed red dead. Of course, it had to be today. Today of all days when the state labor inspectors were scheduled to visit our company, and as the head of HR, I needed to be there early. I tried prying open the key fob with my nails, but the back cover wouldn't budge. "Seriously," I muttered, looking around for a screwdriver. We always had spare batteries in the top drawer of the living room cabinet, at least we used to. I pulled the box out and shuffled through old cables, light bulbs, and random screws. No batteries. None. A knot of frustration twisted in my chest. I didn't have time for this. Maybe Daniel had some in his toolbox on the balcony. He always kept a stash of odds and ends out there. Screwdrivers, wire, duct tape, things he used maybe once a year but swore were essential. I slid open the balcony door, shivering slightly at the sharp morning air. The small cabinet sat in the corner, dusty and jammed with his tools. I yanked open the drawer, and it nearly came off its rails, spilling contents across the floor. Electrical tape, loose screws, a measuring tape, and no batteries. But something else caught my eye. A simple blue notebook, the kind you'd buy in any convenience store, only it didn't belong there. Daniel was not a write in a notebook kind of man. He used apps, notes on his phone, spreadsheets on his laptop. Seeing that little notebook tucked among tools felt strange, out of place. I picked it up, meaning only to move it aside, but curiosity whispered. I hesitated. It's his, I thought. Private. But my eyes betrayed me. The first page was titled, Winter Clothing Kids. Beneath, an itemized list, puffer coats, hats, mittens, thermal underwear, socks, each one neatly checked with quantities next to them. 2 sets of everything. I frowned, flipping another page. Christmas gifts ideas, plush toys, trains, art supplies, Barbie family set, a programmable robot, wireless headphones. Another page showed numbers for a pediatric dentist, a school prep center, and even a private tutor. My breath caught. What is this? These entries went back 5 years, long before Daniel and I married. His first notes predated me entirely. And recently, just days ago, there were more lists. Christmas gifts again, summer clothing, vacation packing lists. A horrible thought flashed like lightning. Daniel had children I didn't know about. A secret family? I tried to reason with myself. Maybe they were for a friend's kids, maybe for charity. But every instinct screamed otherwise. He had never mentioned children, not even once. And yet, these lists were detailed, meticulous, tender in their way. I thought of all those business trips he took every summer, always somewhere coastal, always refusing to take me because it's all work, no free time. Was that true? Or was he taking them? I clutched the notebook, suddenly aware of my breathing. Quick, shallow. Daniel was the most transparent man I had ever known. He smiled easily, helped anyone who asked, always came home on time, never hid his phone or passwords. I trusted him completely. And yet, this notebook felt like another life entirely. I checked my watch. I was supposed to be at work already, meeting the inspectors before anyone else even clocked in. Instead, I was standing barefoot on the balcony, holding evidence. Evidence of what? Exactly, I didn't know yet, but it felt like betrayal. I set the notebook on the kitchen table and sat down, my fingers trembling slightly. I didn't want to read more. I didn't want to invade his privacy further. But the curiosity, the fear, they were stronger than my resolve. I skimmed more pages, each one a punch to the gut. Summer lists with swimsuits, inflatable armbands, sunscreen, little kids' medicine kits with doses carefully noted. I could see him writing these things, thinking ahead, caring for someone. Children. My chest tightened. Daniel knew I couldn't have kids. I told him that before we married, my voice shaking with shame, expecting him to leave. But he didn't. He took my hands, looked me straight in the eye, and said, I love you. We'll make our own kind of family. And yet here it was, his other life, a life with kids that weren't mine. Maybe they weren't even his. But then why keep it a secret? I stared at the notebook, heart pounding. I couldn't wait until tonight. I needed answers now. I called my boss, voice shaky, claiming I was sick. She wasn't happy but agreed to cover for me. Then I placed the notebook right in the center of the table. If he wanted to hide this, he couldn't anymore. I'd wait for him to come home, and finally I'd know the truth. Waiting for Daniel to come home, I couldn't stop staring at that blue notebook on the kitchen table. But my thoughts spiraled far beyond its pages. They drifted back to a life I thought I'd buried long ago. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York where everyone knew everyone, and secrets didn't stay secret for long. My parents raised me to believe in hard work and decency. I wanted to make them proud, to be someone who gave back. That's why I became a teacher. First grade, bright-eyed kids learning how to read and write, tying their shoes, laughing at my silly songs. But the truth? I wasn't cut out for it. I loved the children, but the endless noise, the constant pressure, the heartbreaking stories of kids who came to school hungry, it all ate away at me. I went home every day, exhausted and doubting myself. So, after 3 years, I quit. My parents were surprised, even disappointed. But I told myself it was temporary, that I'd find another way to make a difference. I moved to the city and landed a job in human resources. It was supposed to be stable, professional, safe. And then I met him. He wasn't Daniel. He was someone else. Someone who seemed charming at first. We went on a few dates, and I let myself fall too fast. I was lonely, eager to prove I could have a normal life like everyone else. When he said he was separated from his wife, I believed him, or maybe I just wanted to. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. The night I told him, expecting shock, but maybe even joy, he laughed. "Amanda, I have a wife and 2 kids. I'm not leaving them. You knew what this was." No, I hadn't known. I'd built my future in my head, and in one sentence he crushed it. I sat in my apartment all night, staring at the walls, my hands over my stomach. I wanted to keep the baby. I wanted to believe I could do it alone. But I was barely surviving paycheck to paycheck, renting a tiny 1-bedroom, no support system in the city. And I couldn't bear the thought of going back to my hometown as the girl who got pregnant by a married man. So I made the hardest decision of my life. The procedure didn't go smoothly. Complications set in, a raging infection, emergency surgery, and then the words from the doctor that hollowed me out completely. "You won't be able to carry children again. I'm sorry." For weeks, I stayed inside, barely eating, crying until I couldn't cry anymore. I hated myself, hated the choices I'd made, hated the silence in that apartment. I promised I'd never let myself be vulnerable like that again. Years later, when I met Daniel, I carried that shame like a stone in my chest. We met at work. He was consulting for our IT department. He had this calm, steady energy, like nothing could shake him. I told him about my infertility before things got serious, expecting him to walk away. But he didn't. He squeezed my hand and said, "Amanda, I'm with you because of who you are, not because of what you can or can't give me." That was the moment I fell in love for real. He made me believe I could still have a family, our own version of it. Pets, maybe adoption someday, or simply each other. I thought we were honest with each other. I thought there were no secrets. And yet that notebook, those names, those lists, that secret life. I glanced at the clock. Daniel wouldn't be home for another 3 hours. My heart thudded like a drum as I tried to distract myself with chores, but I couldn't shake the thought. What if he has children and I never knew? What if he chose me because I can't give him what she did? I pressed my hands to my face, trying to breathe. I had sworn I'd never feel that kind of betrayal again, but here I was, bracing myself for answers I might not be ready to hear. For a moment, I wished I'd never found that notebook at all. The apartment felt unnervingly quiet. No television, no music, not even the hum of the dishwasher I usually left running after dinner. I had turned everything off, as if silence itself could help me think. The blue notebook sat squarely in the middle of the kitchen table, its pages closed but heavy with meaning. I had placed it there deliberately, almost like evidence in plain sight. When Daniel came home, he would see it. He would know I'd read it, and then there would be no turning back. I tried to busy myself. I wiped the counters twice, then rearranged the spice rack, then put it back the way it was. Every few minutes, I found my gaze drifting to the clock. 3:30 p.m., 4:10 p.m., 4:52 p.m. I still had nearly an hour to go before Daniel's shift ended. Part of me wanted to run, to avoid whatever truth waited for me. I could already hear the explanations, ones I wouldn't believe, ones that would only cut deeper. Another part of me wanted to call him right now, demand answers over the phone, rip the bandage off quickly. But I didn't. I waited. My thoughts wouldn't stay still. They kept flashing back to every business trip Daniel had taken over the last 3 years. Trips where he insisted there was no time for me to come along. Trips where he came back looking tired, but oddly softer. Was he spending that time with children? With her children? I stared at my hands on the countertop, remembering how he held them the day I told him I couldn't have kids. "Amanda, that doesn't change how I feel about you," he said back then. I believed him. I still wanted to believe him. But the lists in that notebook, they weren't for charity. They were personal. My phone buzzed. A text. "Daniel, on my way. You okay?" I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Yeah. We need to talk." The dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then nothing. No reply. At 5:45, I heard the familiar sound of keys at the door. My heart pounded, so hard it felt like it would break my ribs. I gripped the edge of the counter as Daniel stepped inside, his usual warm smile fading when he saw my face and then the notebook on the table. He froze. For a second, I saw something in his eyes, panic maybe or guilt. He set his bag down slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching a wild animal. "You found it," he said quietly. I nodded, my voice trembling. "Daniel, what is this? These lists, these kids' clothes, toys, dentist numbers, who are they for?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the notebook, his shoulders sagging as if carrying an invisible weight. Then, finally, he met my eyes. "It's a long story," he said softly. "One I should have told you a long time ago." He pulled out a chair and sat down, clasping his hands together. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked older, tired, vulnerable. "Please, Amanda, let me explain." I sank into the chair across from him, my pulse still thundering in my ears. I braced myself, knowing whatever came next would change everything. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he opened the notebook, flipping through pages like they belonged to someone else. He stopped at one and pressed his fingers on it for a moment, almost as if bracing himself. "I should have told you this before we ever got married," he said quietly. "But I didn't because I was afraid you'd see me differently, and because part of me never really believed it would still matter." "Daniel," my voice was softer than I expected. "Just tell me." He took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the table. Her name was Emily Hartman. I met her when I was fresh out of college, working at a coffee shop while I waited for my first IT contract. She was smart, funny, stubborn in the best way, and beautiful. She made me feel like I could do anything. I felt a sting of jealousy, sharp and uninvited, but I stayed quiet. "We dated for almost 2 years," he continued. "But Emily's life wasn't easy. Her grandmother raised her and money was always tight. When her grandmother's health got worse, the medical bills started piling up. I was trying, Amanda. I really was. But I was just a kid with a part-time job and student loans." He exhaled slowly. "She met someone else, a wealthy man, Sergey. He offered to take care of her, to pay for her grandmother's treatment, to give her a life she thought I couldn't." "She married him?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "She did, and it broke me. But I told myself she deserved stability, that maybe he could give her something I couldn't." His voice cracked slightly. "Only it wasn't stability. Sergey was controlling, jealous, and dangerous. For a while I didn't know. She stopped contacting me after she married him. I figured she was happy." I folded my hands, heart heavy. "What happened?" 3 years ago, I saw her again by accident," Daniel said, his eyes distant, lost in memory. "She was at the grocery store with 2 kids, Liam and Chloe. Her face lit up when she saw me, but then I saw something else in her eyes, fear. That night, she called me. She said Sergey had been hurting her, that she wanted to leave but didn't know how. She begged me not to tell anyone." I covered my mouth, my chest tight. "Daniel!" She said she'd call again, but she never did. A month later, she was gone. He swallowed hard, staring down at his hands. "Sergey killed her, claimed it was an accident during a fight, but the jury didn't buy it. He's serving a life sentence now. And those kids, they were suddenly orphans. Her grandmother was too old to manage them on her own. So you stepped in," I whispered, glancing at the notebook. "Yes." He nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. "Not as their father, I'm not. But I felt responsible. I couldn't save Emily, Amanda, but I could at least make sure her kids had coats in the winter, toys at Christmas, school supplies. I send money. I visit when I can. I take them on trips during the summer so their grandmother can rest. It's not about guilt anymore, it's about them. Liam and Chloe didn't ask for any of this." I stared at him, my heart torn in two. One part of me understood the compassion, the loyalty. The other part hurt. Hurt because I'd never known, because all those times I'd asked about his summer trips, he'd smiled and said, "Just work." "You should have told me," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. "I know." He wiped his eyes. "I was scared. I thought maybe you'd see it as betrayal. I didn't want you to think I was living some double life." I looked at the notebook again, then back at him. "Were you still in love with her?" Daniel's gaze met mine, steady despite the tears. "No. I loved her once, yes, but she made her choice and I moved on. I built a life with you because I love you, Amanda. That hasn't changed." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But my chest still ached, filled with questions and insecurities. Why hide it if there was nothing to hide? Why keep those lists secret? "I can't have kids, Daniel." The words slipped out before I could stop them. "You knew that, and you said it didn't matter. But all this time, you were spending summers with someone else's children. Do you have any idea how that feels?" He leaned forward, voice breaking. "Amanda, please, it's not about replacing something I don't have with you. It's about doing what's right for them. I thought protecting you from that past would make things easier, but I see now it just made it worse." The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the things I wanted to say, but couldn't. I closed my eyes, taking a shaky breath. "I need time, Daniel. I need to think." He nodded slowly, pain etched across his face. "Take all the time you need. I'll tell you everything, every detail if that's what it takes. No more secrets. Just don't give up on us, okay?" I didn't answer right away. My hands were cold, trembling. My life had changed in the span of one conversation, and I wasn't sure yet how to feel about it. After Daniel's confession, the apartment felt colder, as if the truth itself had sucked the warmth out of the room. He sat there silently, eyes on me, waiting for a response that wouldn't come. I finally stood, my legs shaky, and walked into the bedroom. I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down until I sat on the floor. My hands were trembling, my pulse still pounding like I had just run a marathon. I'd asked for honesty and I got it, but the truth felt heavier than the lie ever had. Emily Hartman. The name echoed in my mind like a ghost. She was dead, and yet she was here in my home, in my marriage, in the way Daniel had kept his summer's secret. She was everywhere, and I hated that I envied a woman who wasn't even alive. I stood and stared at myself in the mirror above the dresser. My eyes were red, my face pale. I whispered to my reflection, "You're being ridiculous, Amanda. He didn't cheat on you. He didn't lie about loving you." My voice cracked. "He just never let you in." That was the part that cut the deepest. Not that he'd helped children who needed him, but that he'd faced it alone, as if I couldn't handle his past, as if I wasn't strong enough to carry it with him. But deep down, I wondered if maybe he was right. Because as soon as I saw those lists, all I could think about was what I couldn't give him. Children, family, the things he clearly cherished enough to keep showing up for, even if they weren't his. I pressed a hand against my stomach, the old wound flaring to life. I remembered that cold clinic room, the smell of antiseptic, the way the doctor looked at me after the surgery. "You won't be able to carry children again." "I'm sorry." Back then, I thought I'd lost a future. Daniel had been the one who convinced me I still had one, that we could create a life built on love, not biology. I'd believed him. And now I couldn't stop picturing him holding Liam's hand at the beach, Chloe riding on his shoulders. I could see them laughing, bonding, making memories. A family, even if it wasn't legally his, and definitely not mine. I wiped my eyes and stepped out of the bedroom. Daniel was still at the kitchen table, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He looked up when he heard me. "Amanda," his voice was rough. "Please say something." I swallowed hard. I don't even know where to start. He stood slowly. "Start anywhere. Yell at me. Throw something if you need to. Just don't shut me out." But I couldn't yell. I couldn't even summon anger, only a dull ache in my chest. "You built this entire second life," I said quietly, "and you didn't think I should be a part of it." Daniel winced. "That's not what I meant. I thought I was sparing you pain." I shook my head. "You didn't spare me anything. You made me wonder if I was enough." His face crumpled. "Amanda, you are enough. You've always been enough. I love you. Then why didn't you trust me with this?" My voice cracked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. He stepped closer, but I raised a hand, keeping distance between us. I wasn't ready to be touched, not yet. "I need space," I whispered. Daniel nodded, slowly, eyes shining. "Take it. I'll do whatever you need. Just, please don't give up on us." I turned away, gripping the doorframe for balance, my chest tight. I didn't want to give up. I loved him, but love didn't erase the sting of secrets. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the blue notebook still on the table, like a silent witness. My thoughts swirled with jealousy, grief, and something else I couldn't name. A tiny spark of curiosity about those kids. Liam and Chloe. What did they think of Daniel? Did they love him? Did they call him Dad? And what would they think of me? Sleep never came. Instead, I made a decision I wasn't sure I'd regret. I would meet them. I needed to see for myself what kind of life Daniel had been living without me. The next morning, Daniel hesitated when I told him I wanted to meet them. He searched my face for anger, for bitterness, but all he found was resolve. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "I do," I replied. "If we're going to move forward, I need to know them. And I need to see for myself what all this means to you." We drove in silence along the coastal road toward Portland. The October air was crisp, the ocean visible beyond stretches of pine and rocky shoreline. I tried to focus on the beauty outside, but my mind kept returning to that blue notebook and all the emotions it had unearthed. Daniel's hand rested on the gearshift, fingers twitching like he wanted to take mine, but wasn't sure if he was allowed. I didn't reach for him. Not yet. When we pulled into a quiet, suburban neighborhood, my stomach tightened. A small white house sat at the end of a narrow street, a garden full of late-blooming mums lining the walkway. On the porch stood an older woman, frail but upright, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She waved as we parked. "That's Margaret," Daniel said. "Emily's grandmother." Margaret smiled as we approached, her eyes kind despite the deep lines of age and grief. "Daniel," she greeted warmly before turning to me, "and you must be Amanda." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's nice to meet you." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and laundry soap. Toys were scattered in a corner of the living room, and crayon drawings covered one wall. A small voice called out from the hallway, "Uncle Daniel." A boy, Liam, raced into the room, about 6 years old, all energy and bright blue eyes. He wrapped his arms around Daniel's waist. Daniel crouched to hug him, his face softening in a way I'd never seen before. And then a smaller figure peeked from behind the couch. Chloe, 4 years old, curly brown hair framing her round face. She clutched a stuffed rabbit and stared at me with wide, cautious eyes. Daniel smiled gently at her. "Come say hi, Chloe. This is Amanda." For a moment, she hesitated. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, still clutching the rabbit. She looked up at me, her eyes full of quiet uncertainty, and whispered, "Hi." "Hi, Chloe." I knelt so we were eye level. "I love your bunny. What's his name?" Her lips curved in a shy smile. "Mr. Buttons." "That's a perfect name," I said, and something in her face softened. She reached out, small fingers brushing against my hand before slipping into it. It was such a simple gesture, but it pierced straight through my chest. This tiny, hesitant child was letting me in, even just a little. Margaret watched quietly, her hands clasped. "They've been through a lot," she said softly, "but Daniel has been a blessing. I don't know what I'd do without him." I looked at Daniel, who was now listening intently as Liam explained how he'd built a Lego spaceship. He wasn't just helping them out of guilt, he loved these kids. That much was obvious. And for the first time, I didn't feel jealous. I just felt sad. Sad for Emily, for these children, for Daniel who had carried this responsibility alone, and even for myself, because I'd spent so much time fearing the past that I hadn't seen the present clearly. Later, in the backyard, Chloe tugged at my sleeve. "Will you come back?" she asked softly, eyes big and earnest. I blinked back tears. "If it's okay with you, I'd like to." She smiled, and for a moment it felt like something inside me cracked open. Not broken, just open. When we left that afternoon, the car ride was different. Daniel reached for my hand again, and this time I let him hold it. "I'm sorry I kept this from you," he said quietly. I squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out together." And for the first time since finding that notebook, I actually believed it. The following weeks were quieter between Daniel and me. But it wasn't the silence of distance anymore. It was the kind of silence that comes when you're learning to listen again. We started spending more weekends in Portland, sometimes taking Margaret out for lunch, sometimes just giving her a break while we stayed with the kids. I had expected awkwardness, maybe even resistance, but Liam and Chloe took to me faster than I imagined. The first time Liam called me by name, I felt a strange warmth in my chest. The first time Chloe reached for my hand without hesitation, that warmth deepened. One Saturday morning, we all gathered in Margaret's kitchen to bake cookies. Liam measured flour with too much enthusiasm, covering the counter in white dust, while Chloe carefully placed chocolate chips, one by one, into the bowl. Daniel stood behind me, laughing when I got a smear of dough on my cheek. I caught his smile out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't the guilty, nervous smile he'd worn when I first discovered the notebook. It was soft, grateful, almost relieved. "You're really good with them," he said quietly, his voice carrying something tender. I shrugged, fighting back emotion. I didn't think I would be. I paused, swallowing hard. I thought seeing them would hurt more than it does. But it doesn't, Daniel. It feels right. He reached for my flour-dusted hand and squeezed. "They like you, Amanda, more than you know." Later, as the cookies baked and the house filled with warm, sweet air, Chloe climbed onto my lap with a coloring book. She held up a crayon drawing for figures standing under a bright sun. One tall man, one older woman, a small girl and a boy. And next to them, a woman with long hair holding the girl's hand. "That's you," Chloe said shyly, pointing to the woman in the drawing. "You're part of our family now." Something inside me broke wide open. I had spent so long believing I could never be a mother, that my chance at family had ended in a sterile clinic years ago. Yet here I was holding a little girl who saw me as hers, and it felt real. Daniel crouched beside us, his hand resting lightly on my back. His voice was low, full of something I couldn't quite name. "Amanda, I know this wasn't the life you pictured. It's not what I pictured either, but maybe this is better." I looked at him, then at Chloe, then at Liam spinning in circles in the living room with a paper airplane, and I knew he was right. This wasn't the family I had imagined, but maybe it was exactly the one I needed. That night, on the drive home, Daniel reached for my hand again, and this time I held on tightly, not because I was afraid of losing him, but because I wanted to hold this moment, this feeling of quiet belonging. For the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like the woman who couldn't have children or the woman haunted by past mistakes. I felt like someone who had stepped into something bigger than herself, something healing. When we got home, Daniel pulled me into an embrace and whispered, "Thank you for giving them a chance, and for giving me one too." I rested my head on his shoulder and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "I'm done running from the past, Daniel. Let's just be here now." And for the first time, I really meant it. Months passed, and what had once felt like an exposed wound slowly became something softer, something I could hold without pain. We visited Liam and Chloe almost every weekend. Sometimes Daniel took them to the park while I stayed back with Margaret. sipping tea as she shared stories of Emily's childhood, the bright, stubborn girl who loved books and hated carrots. Other times, we all piled into the kitchen again to bake, or bundled up to walk along the rocky coast. It wasn't long before the kids began to treat me like I'd always been there. Liam proudly showed me every Lego masterpiece, every drawing from school. Chloe climbed into my lap at story time without hesitation, resting her head on my shoulder as if it had always been her place. The first time she called me Mommy, it wasn't dramatic or planned. She was tired, eyes heavy, as I carried her up the stairs to bed. "Good night, Mommy," she mumbled sleepily, not even realizing what she'd said. I froze, heart swelling so fast it hurt. Daniel saw the look on my face and just smiled softly, his eyes shining. He didn't correct her. Neither did I. On the drive home that night, I turned to Daniel. "I thought I'd lost my chance to be a mom forever," I admitted quietly. "But somehow, I didn't. It just looks different than I imagined." He squeezed my hand, his voice warm and certain. "That's because you didn't lose anything, Amanda. You gained something new." And he was right. The truth is, healing rarely looks like we think it will. Sometimes it isn't about getting back what was lost. It's about finding something unexpected, something you never even knew you needed. I still carry my past with me. The mistakes, the heartbreak, the day a doctor told me I'd never have children of my own. But now, when I think of the future, I don't feel that hollow ache anymore. I feel Liam's small hand slipping into mine. I hear Chloe's giggle as she colors outside the lines. I see Daniel looking at me not with guilt or secrets, but with gratitude and love. This isn't the life I thought I'd have, but it's the one I'm thankful for every single day. So if you're listening to this and you're holding on to an old hurt, afraid you'll never be whole again, maybe the path to healing isn't about going back. Maybe it's about looking forward, about opening your heart to something different, something better. Because sometimes family isn't who you're born to, it's who you choose. And I choose this one.